Aloha champions, and welcome back to another science video. Today we are on Unit 5, Chapter 2, Types of Fossil Fuels. So our big question that we have to answer for today is, what are fossil fuels? We talked briefly about a few examples of fossil fuels in the previous video, such as petroleum and coal and natural gas. But let's read in to find out a little bit more about these fossil fuels. A train loaded with coal rolls toward a power plant. The train is powered by diesel fuel. The moving parts of the train are lubricated with different kinds of oil. As the engineer controls the train, he uses a plastic fork to eat his lunch from a plastic container. Later that day, he goes home and uses a butane lighter to start a small coal fire in a stove to heat his home. Every sentence in this paragraph above describes the use of at least one fossil fuel product. Coal, oil, and natural gas are three types of fossil fuels. People have developed many different substances from these fuels too. So you've got Vaseline, you've got propane, you've got the plastics for a fork and for a container, and even some school supplies are made with plastics derived from fossil fuels. How does petroleum form? Well, fossil fuels are made up of the remains of organisms. We call them fossil fuels because humans use them to fuel processes, such as heating homes, powering vehicles, and producing electricity. All three fossil fuels are made of the remains of organisms that lived long ago. Some marine organisms that died and settled on the ocean floor were then buried by layers of sand or mud. That sediment became rock over time. The weight of that rock on the organism's remains provided pressure and intense heat that turned them into petroleum, or crude oil. Oil companies that look for to extract petroleum can study samples of the ocean floor. They use different technologies to identify areas that may hold oil deep under the surface. This work costs a lot of money. But there is a lot of money to be made back because oil is widely used by people for many purposes. So the process of petroleum and natural gas is 300 to 400 million years ago. You had different organisms such as whales, eels, and manta rays, and they passed away. And they're buried under all the sand and mud on top of it. And over time, over millions of years, it breaks down under all that pressure to form oil and natural gas. But how does coal and natural gas form? Well, coal forms in a very similar way. Millions of years ago, Earth's landmasses were covered with plants. Shallow seas rose and fell, killing many of the plants. Some plants fell into swamps when they died. Their remains were buried under layers of mud. There was not enough oxygen available in the mud to allow the remains to decompose. Instead, they became a substance called peat. As more sediment built up over the peat pressed together and became solid. This is what we know as coal. Coal is very abundant and has been found all over the earth. Natural gas forms where petroleum and coal form. Because gas is less dense than solids and liquids, it rises in Earth's crust until it gets stuck under a layer of rock. Sometimes natural gas is pumped out of an area above an oil field before the oil is removed. Methane is the most abundant gas in this mixture. So here we have a layer of coal that was buried under all this sedimentary rock that is pushing down on the peat, turning it into coal. All right. Varieties of coal, petroleum, and natural gas. There are different forms of coal, petroleum, and natural gas. Coal that has been under the greatest pressure is harder. It's blacker and shinier than other types. The lightest coal tends to be brown and is considered low grade. In between are forms that are black but fairly dull and not as dense as the shiny high grade coal. Petroleum is a liquid in Earth's crust. The liquid can be very thin and light to thick and heavy. This means that some crude oil floats if spilled at sea, and some sinks to the ocean floor. Natural gas consists mostly of methane, but it can also contain propane and butane in gas form. Methane is piped into homes and businesses for heating and cooking. Propane is popular for use in small tanks for barbecues, and butane is often used in lighters. Here we have a series of different coal. It's all formed from the same thing. Plants and trees buried down under the earth, and depending on the amount of pressure, depends on how shiny the coal is. So I know this was a relatively short chapter, but hopefully you learned a little bit more about fossil fuels, whether it's petroleum, coal, or natural gas. You'll have 5 to 10 questions to answer on Google Classroom about this video. So thank you for your time. I hope you stay awesome, and I will talk to you real soon.